All right. Uh, okay, I'm going to say that phrase again. Happy New Year. Today we are going to talk about Module 30, which is observational learning. I feel confident this one's going to be short, although I'm going to be adding a little video to it that you will see at the end, in addition to the video you see on these slides. All right, so let's get started. We're going to look at what is observational learning, how it's different from associative learning. We are going to look at and understand the mirroring effect and the actual mirror neurons that are located in our brain. We're going to talk about what are the impacts of what we see modeled, the pro-social modeling and antisocial modeling. And then we are going to talk a little bit about the whole discussion of violence that we see in the media and on television and things like that. So, all right, so we'll do this in class, but who has been a significant role model for you? Start thinking about that. What did you learn from them? What did they model? And what are some ways that you might model behaviors with others? So what is observational learning? So observational learning is we are learning by direct experience by watching, and the key word here is imitating others. So we call it modeling the actual process itself. So if a child sees a sister burn her fingers on a hot stove, watches it occur, ouch, that they are going to hopefully learn through that modeling of the behavior and seeing the obvious signs of pain that they will not do it themselves. So the key researcher and significant psychologist from that has done most of the research with this, that we, learned some of the early discoveries about modeling, is Albert Bandura. And here you actually see him winning the National Medal of Science from President Obama. And Bandura, you guys are going to see the video of his experiment, some actual footage of the experiment. And he's most famous for something called the Bobo doll experiment. And he actually made a joke just saying, wow, I just wanted to change my image. I didn't want to necessarily be as completely associated and identified with this Bobo doll, but that is, it's a pretty significant experiment. So I'm going to talk about it. We're going to see the footage in class. All right, so like I said, it's called the Bobo doll experiment. And what he did was he had a couple different rooms, and he had, different kids. Remember, in an experiment, you're going to have the experimental group and the control group so they can make a comparison. All right, so the experimental group, what happened with the kids is they observed a model, which is here you see in the pictures, a teacher either being kind and gentle with this Bobo doll. It's kind of like a punchy doll. I used to have one in a classroom, and I'm hoping to get another one. And so they either observed, if they were in the experimental group, they observed the doll, the model actually being really aggressive towards the Bobo doll. In the other group, they observed the model being really kind and gentle, all right, in the control group. And then what they did was the children were sitting in a room, and then they created a frustrating experience for the children. They told the children, oh no, we've reserved these particular toys for the other children. You guys are going to come over here. And they kind of made them move and go to this other room with this other set of toys. So they kind of were a little frustrated because they had to move. So all the kids equally were created, there was this frustrating situation created. Then this is where the results of the study. What they found when left alone, these children, try to make a prediction yourself. The kids that had observed the aggressive model, kind of beating up the Bobo doll, or the kids that had observed the model, the teacher being really gentle and kind to the Bobo doll, what do you think the kids did with the Bobo doll when they were left alone with the Bobo doll? And then there were other props, there were other toys in that room as well. You guessed it. The ones that observed the aggressive models acted aggressively to the Bobo doll, as you see here. And the ones, they don't actually show you the pictures of those, but the kids that observed the gentle model, they were gentle with the Bobo doll. And they started to use other props, like they picked up other toys and started, if they were, saw the aggressive model, they actually started using those toys to kind of act aggressively to the Bobo doll. So they concluded with that research is that, especially children, they're going to imitate and model what they observe, what they see other people doing. All right. So this is kind of explaining what I just said. And there was also included in the if the model was aggressive, they also would even say aggressive things like sock them in the nose, hit them down, kick them. All right. So we already know the results of the study. Observing the aggressive outbursts apparently lowered their inhibitions. I feel like I should pause for that. So that just means that when they saw the aggression, when the word inhibited, it means that you might think a little bit more about what you're doing before you do it. When we think of, it lowered their inhibition. So they just felt more comfortable just doing whatever. So, but something more was also at work, for the children imitated the very acts they had observed, which is what I mentioned. So there is some other terminology that goes with this. We recognize that when we watch models, that you can experience vicarious reinforcement, and vicarious means like you're kind of experiencing it with them, even though you're not experiencing it specifically yourself. So I don't know if you've ever heard the word vicarious before. Sometimes you'll hear it with like, that parents live vicariously through their children. So like, meaning they have their children doing certain things like playing sports and trying to be successful in those sports because it makes them feel like they're going through it themselves. All right. So by watching models, we experience vicarious reinforcement or vicarious punishment, and we learn to anticipate a behavior's consequences in situations like those we're observing. And, obviously the more, and that's why they have this in the media and on commercials and things like that, we are more likely to imitate and see as a reliable model people that are celebrities or considered admirable. All right, Bandura's Bobo doll experiment is most closely associated with which of the following? You got it. E, observational learning. All right, so we already talked about this, or I introduced you, and you can also add to your thinking about who your models are and, who you model, who do you model for others, like if you have a little brother or sister or something like that. But think of this in terms of vicarious reinforcement and punishment by watching your role model. Reinforcement would be like, the positive, and punishment, the negative. So next, we found out that in our brain, that in the frontal lobe, there is something called mirror neurons. So like when you are watching a dramatic scene in a movie, like that's, they're doing something, very physical, and there's emotion and all that stuff. There are actual neurons that activate in the frontal lobe, that it's almost like you're looking in the mirror, like you are experiencing it along with them. And I have a really funny example. I don't know if I gave this one to you in class, but there was one time that I was watching the Academy Awards or something like that. And they were giving like this special, gift and award to people that work behind the scenes in a movie. And everybody, the actors and actresses, when they, made the announcement of who won the award, they were very like emotional and just so happy for this person, that works behind the scenes, and they were clapping, and there was all this emotion. And as I was watching it, the mirror neurons were activating to such an extent that I literally thought I was there with them. And I like, Okay, right, you get the idea. I stood up and started clapping and I'm like watching it on the television. So very, very powerful, those mirror neurons. So here's another example. They did a 27-year analysis of humpback whale observations, and a single whale in 1980 whacked the water to drive prey fish into a clump. In the years since, the lobtail technique spread among other whales. So just one time, it can be like contagious and everybody just starts imitating and following. And start thinking about that with social media, just saying. One response and then everybody starts following it. All right, so another example, researchers trained group of vervet monkeys to prefer either blue or pink corn by soaking one color in a disgusting tasting solution. And then 4 to 6 months later, when the new generation of monkeys, that the adults that had been exposed to the pink color or whichever color initially, that they just started only going to that particular color. But then this is the key point, the children, the infant monkeys just imitated and because of the modeling of the mother, just did the same thing. So maybe only went to the pink corn, etc. Once again, another example of modeling with animals. Here's it happens at a very young age, 8 to 16 months. Infants can imitate various novel gestures, so like smiling and things like that. By 12 months, they actually can move and start moving in the same directions, doing more like actual physical movements that are being imitated by a model. And then at age 14 months, they actually can imitate acts modeled on TV. So that's how early that TV can start influencing. All right, we imitate each other's emotions, can be contagious as well. And we're going to talk about that more in we have a unit that's actually called motivation and emotion. We observe others' postures, faces, voices, and we kind of synchronize. So we follow along. Like, have you ever noticed? I don't know, pay attention. If you just kind of go like this, start to observe and see if other people start to do the same thing and start to imitate it. Obviously, moods are going to be modeled as well. Imitation helps us gain friends, leading us to mimic those we like. Here's the example of like empathy, if you know what the word empathy. So empathy is not sympathy. It's where you are actually kind of feeling and understanding the pain or the emotions or, the experiences of another person. In this particular case, this person here on the left is actually feeling the actual true physical pain, and these different parts of the brain are activating. And then the empathy of the observed loved one that was observing it, it is another particular, it's more of the emotional parts of the brain, like we maybe would say like the amygdala and the limbic system areas. All right, so the last couple of things we're going to talk about is what are the effects of imitation and modeling when we observe somebody doing something positive, constructive, and helpful. Does it have an influence? Will we model and imitate those same behaviors? And the answer is yes, we will. In not every case, but many cases. We call this pro-social modeling. Watching others help pick up spilled books or coins and viewing positively themed television program can produce positive behaviors in others. And this girl's learning orphan nursing skills as well as compassion by observing her mentor in this Humane Society program. Oh, I want to do that program. That looks wonderful. All right, pro-social modeling. And you guessed it, there is the opposite. There's something called antisocial modeling, where more the negative, aggressive, violent watching a model and imitating, you could start doing the opposite, where it can have negative effects. This helps explain why abusive parents might have aggressive children. As much as you would want and you hope that people, and I think through through awareness, it could decrease this. But unfortunately, the research does show is that because of that modeling behavior, that they are much more likely to become abusive children to their own children in the future if they came from that home of abusive parents. And it's because, that's how they saw, that's how you deal with problems and things of that nature, is through aggressive parenting. So it's unfortunate, but like I said, I think through awareness that could change. So TV shows, movies, online videos are sources of observational learning. Here's a couple some data here. During the first 18 years, most children in developed countries spend more time watching TV than they spend in school. And then here we've combined those two. So now we make you look at a screen while you're in school as well. The average teen watches is more than 4 hours a day. The average adult, 3 hours. Obviously, it's much higher now. This is back in 2010. In between 1998 and 2006, primetime violence on TV reportedly increased 75%. Analysis of more than 3,000 network and cable programs aired during one closely studied year revealed nearly 6 in 10 featured violence, and 74% of the violence went unpunished. So meaning, like, not only were you watching violent images, like a gun scene or something like that, but there were scenes where it was just happening. The violence was occurring, but it wasn't like there was an actual consequence for that negative violence. What is depicted in violent programming? 58% of violent shows do not depict the victim's pain. Nearly half of the incidents involved justified violence, and nearly half involved an attractive perpetrator. That's interesting. All right, so a couple little things they found. We're going to get a little bit more specific. Watch here that through the studies, and there have been numerous studies here, that watching a violent cartoon, much more likely to increase that those children are going to start imitating those behaviors. Oh no, but we like this show. And then limited exposure to violent programs, that you might engage in other activities that would not be acting out the Power Rangers. And the other term that we tend to talk about is something called desensitization. And this is the one that I feel most concerned about, and I worry about this, is that the more that you're exposed to things that are violent and that aggressive, it's like you kind of get used to it. You know how we talked about like sensory adaptation? So think of this in the sense of actually looking at particular behaviors that eventually they're just not going to impact you as much. Viewers become progressively less bothered by the violence compared to the control group. And notice here it says, and might potentially have less sympathy. So it's basically saying the APA Task Force Violent Media found that the research demonstrates a consistent relation between violent video game use and increases in aggressive behavior, aggressive cognitions, and aggressive affect, and decreases in prosocial behavior, empathy, and sensitivity to aggression. Sorry, I know I've been reading a lot of slides, but I'm going to summarize. So my takeaway with this, and having seen all the research for many years, having children myself, obviously having my own experiences of watching different media and all that, it's really about paying attention and being reflective and being honest and looking at yourself of how much media imaging are you seeing, how much of that is violent, how are you feeling, like what is your frustration level, and then also recognizing your behavior and just being honest. If you're noticing that you are watching a violent show and then you're getting really agitated and kind of yelling at your family member or something like that, you need to step back and like, well, maybe I need to decrease my exposure to these images. I'm not saying, I know that video games are a huge thing. I know they're out there. But I think with awareness and also in moderation and being aware and reflecting on your own behaviors. Okay. All right. And We know that the same thing can happen with kids. And we know it can have more of an impact. I'm able to talk to you about this, and you can reflect on it as a mature, teenager, adolescent. But it's much more difficult to try to explain this to a 5 or 6-year-old that might be watching like violent television. They're not necessarily going to understand how it's impacting them. All right. 30 seconds worth of glorification of a soap bar sells soap, and 25 minutes worth of glorification of violence sells violence. Let's think about that. So this last thing, we're not going to actually talk about this in this video, but maybe I think in class, I think we will maybe go through this, looking at how you could help a child stop throwing temper tantrums through using some of these different learning techniques. So you can just think about it for a second. And I am going to be adding a little video of my own little observational learning demonstration. And I hope you guys have an incredibly wonderful day. Bye.